The rain hammered Willow Creek, a small Colorado town, the night Eli Carter was thrown out of his home. At 17, he stood trembling on the porch, his father's voice thundering louder than the storm. "No son of mine will live like this." Eli's crime was loving another boy. And for that, he was cast into the dark with nothing but a backpack and a broken heart. He stumbled down the gravel path, the weight of rejection heavier than the soaked clothes clinging to his skin. Willow Creek was all he'd ever known, its dusty main street, the diner where he'd flipped burgers, the church where his mother's hymns still echoed in his mind. But that night, it became a prison he had to escape. By morning, he was gone, hitchhiking west with no plan. Only the ache of a family lost and a town that turned its back. 10 years later, Eli Carter was no longer that scared boy. San Francisco had shaped him, its vibrant streets, its unapologetic pride, its community that taught him love was not a sin, but a strength. He'd built a life, a modest apartment, a job as a community organizer, and a partner, Jamie, whose laughter could light up even the foggiest Bay Area mornings. Yet, Willow Creek haunted him. Not the town itself, but the unresolved pain. The father who'd called him an abomination. The mother who'd stayed silent. When the letter arrived, it was like a ghost knocking. "Eli, the town's in trouble." His mother's shaky handwriting read, "The river's rising, and the dam's failing. People are scared. I know it's been years, but we need you." No apology, no mention of the past, just a plea. Eli stared at the letter, his heart torn between resentment and a strange, stubborn loyalty to the place that had once rejected him. Jamie urged him to go. "You're not that kid anymore," he said, squeezing Eli's hand. "Show them who you are now." The drive back to Willow Creek was a journey through time. Every mile marker stirred memories. The high school where he'd kissed Ryan under the bleachers, the park where they'd been caught, the whispers that followed. When he pulled into town, the sight of the swollen river and the panicked faces at the community center hit him like a punch. The dam, built decades ago, was crumbling, and a flood would wipe out half the town. Eli's expertise in community organizing honed in San Francisco's grassroots movements was exactly what they needed. But would they accept it from him? He stepped into the community center, and the room fell silent. Faces he'd grown up with: Mrs. Larson from the bakery, Coach Daniels, his old friend Sarah stared, some with curiosity, others with unease. His father, Tom Carter, stood at the back, arms crossed, his face a mask of stone. Eli's mother, Ruth, rushed to him, her eyes brimming with tears. "You came," she whispered, but the warmth was fleeting. The town needed a leader, not a reunion. Eli didn't waste time. He assessed the situation, the dam's structural flaws, the evacuation plans, the limited resources. His years of coordinating relief efforts kicked in. He rallied volunteers, delegated tasks, and contacted engineers he knew from the city. But the tension was palpable. Some townsfolk muttered about the gay kid running the show. Tom's silence was louder than their whispers. Eli pushed forward, ignoring the sting, focusing on sandbags, emergency routes, and keeping panic at bay. By nightfall, the rain hadn't stopped, and the dam's cracks were widening. Eli stood on the riverbank, mud caking his boots, directing a team to reinforce the barriers. Sarah, now a paramedic, worked beside him. "You've changed," she said, her voice soft but proud. "You're stronger than any of us thought." Eli gave a tight smile, but his eyes drifted to his father, who was hauling sandbags nearby, refusing to meet his gaze. The past wasn't bare yet, it was alive, raw, and threatening to drown them all. The river roared louder than Eli's thoughts, its muddy waters churning like the emotions he'd buried for a decade. He hadn't slept in 24 hours, but adrenaline kept him moving, directing volunteers, checking weather reports, coordinating with the engineers racing from Denver. Willow Creek's survival hung by a thread, and Eli was the one tying the knots. The community center buzzed with activity. Families huddled with blankets. Kids clung to parents, and the air smelled of coffee and fear. Eli stood at a makeshift command table, sketching evacuation routes on a map. His mother hovered nearby, offering water and quiet encouragement. But her glances toward Tom were heavy with unspoken words. Eli felt the weight of her hope that this crisis might mend what was broken between them. He wasn't so sure. Tom Carter was a pillar of Willow Creek, a man whose word carried weight at church and town hall. His rejection of Eli had set the tone for the town's judgment years ago. Now, as Eli gave orders, Tom's presence loomed like a storm cloud. He worked hard hauling supplies, reinforcing barriers, but never spoke to his son. Eli caught glimpses of him, his broad shoulders hunched, his face etched with lines deeper than Eli remembered. Was it guilt, pride, or just the strain of the flood? A shout broke Eli's focus. The dam's leaking worse. It was Coach Daniels, his voice hoarse from yelling over the rain. Eli ran to the site, his boots slipping in the mud. The dam's concrete face was spiderwebbed with cracks, water seeping through like blood from a wound. The engineers weren't due for hours, and the river was rising fast. Eli's mind raced. He'd seen disaster response plans in San Francisco, temporary fixes, diversion tactics. He barked orders: redirect water with sandbags, dig a channel to ease pressure. The volunteers hesitated, glancing at Tom for approval. Tom nodded, and they moved. The work was grueling. Eli's hands blistered as he stacked sandbags, his body aching but his resolve ironclad. Sarah stayed close, her paramedic skills on standby. "You're doing what no one else here could," she said, bandaging a volunteer's cut. Eli shook his head. "I'm just doing what I know." But her words lingered, a reminder of the strength he'd found in exile. As midnight approached, a new problem surfaced. The town's only bridge, the lifeline to the highway, was flooding. If it went down, evacuation would be impossible. Eli proposed a risky plan: reinforce the bridge's supports with steel beams from the old mill. It meant diverting manpower from the dam, a gamble that could cost everything. The room erupted in debate. "We can't risk it." "Mrs. Larson snapped. "The dam's what matters." Others nodded, fear outweighing trust in Eli's judgment. Tom stepped forward, his voice cutting through the noise. "He's right. The bridge is our way out. We do it." The room stilled. Eli met his father's eyes for the first time in years, searching for some anything bane duty. Tom looked away, but his support shifted the tide. The volunteers rallied, and Eli led a team to the mill under a sky that refused to relent. At the bridge, the work was chaos. The river clawed at the supports, and the beams were heavier than expected. Eli climbed into the water himself, guiding the beams into place, his body numb from the cold. Sarah shouted warnings about hypothermia, but he waved her off. This was bigger than him. It was about proving he belonged, not just to the town, but to himself. As dawn broke, the bridge held, but the dam's leaks were growing. Eli knew the real fight was just beginning. Dawn painted Willow Creek in shades of gray, the rain relentless as Eli stood on the dam, staring at the cracks that threatened to swallow the town. His breath steamed in the cold, his body screaming for rest. But there was no time. The engineers had arrived, their faces grim as they confirmed his fears. The dam wouldn't hold much longer. Evacuation was now a necessity, not a precaution. Eli returned to the community center, where fear had turned to desperation. Families packed what little they could carry, their eyes darting to the windows where the river's roar was a constant reminder of danger. Eli's plan was clear: get everyone to higher ground, 10 miles out, before the dam gave way. He divided the town into groups, assigning leaders to each. His voice was steady, but inside, he wrestled with doubt. Could he save them all? His mother pulled him aside, her hands trembling. "Eli, I'm proud of you," she said, her voice breaking. "I should have fought for you back then." The words hit like a wave, stirring the pain he'd tried to bury. He wanted to ask why she hadn't, why she'd let Tom's anger define their family. But there was no time for that now. "We'll talk later, Mom," he said, squeezing her hand, hoping there'd be a later. The evacuation began in chaos. Cars jammed the narrow roads, and some refused to leave, clinging to their homes. Eli worked tirelessly, convincing holdouts, organizing transport for the elderly, ensuring no one was left behind. Sarah drove a van full of kids, her calm voice keeping them from panic. Coach Daniels rallied the high school football team to carry supplies. Even Tom pitched in, directing traffic with a quiet intensity. But the dam's groans grew louder, and time was running out. Halfway through the evacuation, disaster struck. A section of the dam collapsed, sending a surge of water toward the town's outskirts. Eli was at the community center when the news came, his heart sinking. The low-lying farms where Ryan's family still lived were in the flood's path. Ryan, the boy he'd loved at 17. The reason his father had cast him out. Eli hadn't seen him in years, but the thought of his family in danger ignited something fierce. He grabbed a radio and sprinted to his truck, ignoring Sarah's protests. "I have to check the farms," he shouted. The drive was treacherous, the roads slick and half-submerged. When he reached the Thompson farm, Ryan's mother, Ellen, was struggling to load belongings into a pickup. "Eli," she gasped, her face a mix of shock and relief. "Ryan's not here, Hayes, in Denver, but the animals. The house." Eli didn't hesitate. He helped her secure what they could, then drove her to safety, the water nipping at their heels. Back at the evacuation point, Eli's radio crackled with bad news. Another section of the dam was failing. The engineers estimated hours, maybe less, before a full breach. Eli's mind raced for solutions. He remembered a technique from a San Francisco flood response, diverting water through irrigation canals to spread the load. It was a long shot, but it could buy time. He pitched the idea to the engineers, who nodded grimly. "It's risky, but it's all we've got." One said. Eli led a team to the canals, working through mud and exhaustion. Tom was there, hauling pipes, his eyes meeting Eli's for fleeting moments. Was it respect? Regret? Eli couldn't tell, but he felt the weight of their history in every glance. As they opened the canals, water rushed through, easing the pressure on the dam. For now, it held. But the town wasn't safe yet, and Eli knew the hardest choices were still ahead. The canals bought Willow Creek a few precious hours, but the dam's groans were a constant reminder that time was a luxury they didn't have. Eli stood at the evacuation point, a hill overlooking the town, watching families stream in, their faces etched with fear and fatigue. He'd saved dozens already, but the weight of those still in danger pressed on his chest like a stone. He couldn't shake the image of Ryan's mother, her gratitude mingling with the ghosts of his past. Sarah found him, her paramedic vest streaked with mud. You're running on fumes. Eli. Rest for 10 minutes. He shook his head, his eyes scanning the horizon where the river churned. Not until everyone's safe. She didn't argue, just handed him a coffee and stayed by his side, a silent anchor in the storm. Her presence reminded him of the friend he'd lost when he left someone who'd never judged him, even when the town did. The radio crackled with updates. The engineers were reinforcing the dam, but the water's force was relentless. Eli's canal diversion was holding, but it wouldn't last. He needed to get the last stragglers out. But some, like old Mr. Jenkins, refused to leave their homes. Eli drove to Jenkins' farm, the road barely passable. The old man stood on his porch, stubborn as ever. This house has stood for 60 years. He growled. It'll stand now. Eli's patience was fraying, but he softened his voice. Mr. Jenkins, I lost my home once too. I know what it means to you. But you're more than this house. Something in his words broke through. Jenkins nodded, grabbing a photo of his late wife before climbing into Eli's truck. As they drove away, Eli saw the water creeping closer, swallowing the fields. He'd saved one more, but the clock was ticking. Back at the hill, Eli's mother approached, her face pale. Your father's at the dam, she said. He's helping the engineers. But it's dangerous. Eli's stomach twisted. Tom had been a shadow in this crisis, helping, but distant, his silence a wall between them. Now he was risking his life. Eli wanted to feel nothing, but the thought of losing his father before they could speak, really speak, was unbearable. He raced to the dam, where Tom and a handful of volunteers were piling sandbags against the worsening leaks. The structure shuddered, water spraying through new cracks. Eli jumped in, working beside his father for the first time in years. Their movements were synchronized, almost instinctual, but no words passed between them. The tension was a living thing, heavy as the bags they carried. A volunteer slipped, and Eli caught him, earning a nod from Tom Small. But something. The engineers called for a retreat. The dam was too unstable. Eli hesitated, scanning for any last fix. But Tom grabbed his arm. We've done what we can, he said, his voice gruff but steady. It was the first time he'd spoken directly to Eli since he'd returned. They ran, the ground trembling as another section gave way. From a safe distance, they watched the dam hold just barely. Eli's plan had worked. For now. but the town was still at risk. Back at the evacuation point, Eli gathered the volunteers. "We've got one more push," he said. "The hospital's still got patients who need to be moved." The group nodded, exhausted but determined. Sarah squeezed his shoulder, and even Tom stayed, his presence a quiet signal of something shifting. Eli didn't know if it was enough, but for the first time, he felt like he wasn't fighting alone. The hospital was Willow Creek's last stronghold, a squat brick building on the edge of town where the most vulnerable were still trapped. Eli led a convoy of volunteers through the flooded streets, their headlights cutting through the relentless rain. Inside, nurses scrambled to prepare patients' elderly residents. A few kids, and a woman in labor for transport. The dam's collapse was imminent, and every second counted. Eli coordinated with surgical precision, assigning teams to carry stretchers, load medical supplies, and keep families together. Sarah took charge of the kids, her calm voice a lifeline in the chaos. Eli's mother helped with blankets, her hands steady despite the fear in her eyes. Tom was there too, hauling oxygen tanks without a word. Eli caught his father watching him, a flicker of something unreadable in his gaze. Pride, maybe, or regret. There was no time to dwell on it. A nurse shouted, "We've got a problem." The woman in labor, Miah, was having complications. The hospital's only ambulance was stuck on a flooded road, and the nearest doctor was hours away. Sarah, trained for emergencies, stepped in, but she needed Eli's help to keep the situation under control. He knelt beside Miah, holding her hand, talking her through the pain. "You're strong," he told her, his voice steady. "We're getting you through this." Outside, the dam sirens wailed, signaling another breach. Eli's radio crackled with the engineer's warning, 30 minutes. Maybe less. His heart pounded, but he stayed focused, helping Sarah stabilize Miah while directing the evacuation. The volunteers worked like a machine, moving patients to the waiting vans. Tom carried an elderly man to safety, his strength unwavering despite the years etched into his face. Maria's baby came just as the last patients were loaded. A girl, tiny and crying, born in the eye of the storm. Sarah wrapped her in a blanket, tears mixing with rain on her face. Eli felt a lump in his throat, the weight of life and loss colliding. They moved Miah and her newborn to a van, the hospital now empty. But as they drove to the evacuation point, the radio screamed the dam had failed. Water roared through Willow Creek, swallowing homes, the diner, the church. From the hill, Eli watched the town he'd once called home disappear under a muddy tide. Families clung to each other, sobbing, but alive. Eli's plan, his relentless drive, had gotten them out. He stood among them, exhausted, his clothes soaked, his heart raw. Sarah hugged him, whispering, "You did this. You saved us." Tom approached, his boots crunching on the gravel. For a moment, they stood in silence, the flood's roar filling the space between them. "You did good, Eli," Tom said, his voice low, almost breaking. It wasn't an apology, but it was more than Eli had expected. He nodded, unable to speak, the years of pain and distance still heavy but softened by the moment. The town was gone, but its people were safe, and Eli had proven something to them, to his father, To himself. The flood left Willow Creek a ghost town, its streets buried under silt and debris. From the evacuation hill, Eli watched the water recede, revealing the wreckage of a place that had both shaped and shattered him. The townsfolk were safe, scattered across shelters in neighboring counties. But the loss was raw. Homes, memories, livelihoods gone in a night. Yet, in the chaos, something new was stirring: gratitude, resilience, and, for Eli, a fragile hope. He spent the next days organizing relief efforts, drawing on every skill he'd honed in San Francisco. He secured donations, coordinated with FEMA, and found temporary housing for displaced families. Sarah worked beside him, her energy a steady light. "You're not just saving us now," she said, "sorting blankets at a shelter. You're giving us a future." Eli brushed it off, but her words lingered, easing the ache of his past. His mother was a quiet presence, helping where she could, her eyes often on Eli and Tom. The tension between father and son hadn't vanished, but it had shifted. Tom joined the relief efforts, his hands steady as he distributed supplies, his voice gruff but cooperative. Eli caught moments of a shared glance when a family thanked them, a nod when Eli suggested a new plan. It wasn't reconciliation. Not yet. But it was something. One evening, Eli found himself alone with Tom at the shelter, sorting canned goods. The silence was heavy, broken only by the clink of tin. Finally, Tom spoke. "I didn't think you'd come back," he said, not looking up. Eli's chest tightened. "I almost didn't," he admitted. "But Mom asked. And I couldn't let this place go." Tom's hands stilled, and for a moment, Eli thought he'd walk away. Instead, he said, "I was wrong, Eli. About a lot." The words were raw, unfinished, but they cracked something open. Eli didn't know how to respond. The hurt was still there, sharp and deep, but so was the man standing before him, flawed and trying. "I'm not that kid anymore," Eli said quietly. "But I'm still your son." Tom nodded, his eyes glistening, and they worked in silence, the distance between them narrowing, if only by inches. The town's future was uncertain, but Eli's presence had sparked a shift. People who'd once whispered about him now thanked him, their faces soft with respect. Mrs. Larson brought him a pie, her way of saying sorry. Coach Daniels clapped his shoulder, calling him a damn hero. Even Ryan's mother called, her voice thick with emotion, thanking him for saving her home, her life. Eli learned Ryan was married now, living happily in Denver. The news stung, but it also freed him, closing a chapter he'd carried too long. As the relief efforts grew, Eli realized Willow Creek could rebuild not just its buildings, but its heart. He proposed a community plan, a new dam, stronger and modern, funded by grants he'd already started chasing. The idea caught fire, and the townsfolk rallied, their spirit reignited. Eli wasn't sure if he'd stay, but for now, he was here, building something new from the ruins of his past. Weeks passed, and Willow Creek began to stir again. The floodwaters were gone, leaving behind a scarred landscape and a community determined to rise. Eli was at the heart of it, his days filled with meetings, grant applications, and plans for a new dam. He'd become the town's anchor, a role he never imagined when he'd fled a decade ago. But with every step forward, the past tugged at him, demanding resolution. His mother invited him to dinner at their temporary home, a small rental on the edge of the county. Eli hesitated, memories of that rainy night still vivid. But Jamie's voice echoed in his mind. "You're stronger than the pain." He went, carrying a bottle of wine and a heart full of questions. The table was set simply, Ruth's familiar chicken casserole filling the air with warmth. Tom was there, quieter than usual, his hands fidgeting with a napkin. Dinner was awkward at first, the weight of unspoken words heavy. Ruth broke the silence, her voice soft. "Eli, I failed you back then. I was scared, and I let your father's anger win." Her eyes were wet, and Eli felt his own sting. "You did what you could," he said, though the words felt incomplete. He turned to Tom, waiting, hoping for something more. Tom cleared his throat. "I thought I was protecting you," he said, his voice low. "Thought I could fix you. I was wrong, and I've paid for it every day since." It wasn't a full apology, but it was honest, raw. Eli's anger flared, then softened. "I didn't need fixing," he said. "I needed you to love me." Tom nodded, his face crumpling. And for the first time, Eli saw his father's vulnerability, not just his pride. The conversation didn't erase the years, but it was a start. Eli shared stories of San Francisco, of Jamie, of the life he'd built. Ruth listened, her smile growing. Tom was quieter, but he didn't look away. When Eli left, his mother hugged him tightly, whispering, "You're home now, even if it's just for a while." Tom offered a handshake, firm and lingering, a silent promise to try. Back at the shelter, Eli threw himself into the rebuilding plans. The new dam was approved, and the town buzzed with hope. Sarah organized a community meeting, where Eli presented his vision, not just a dam, but a revitalized Willow Creek with inclusive Spasiza Community Center. A park, a place where everyone belonged. The crowd cheered, and even those who'd once shunned him nodded in approval. Eli felt a shift, a sense of belonging he hadn't known he craved. But the work wasn't done. Some resisted change, clinging to old prejudices. A few grumbled about Eli's agenda, their words a reminder of why he'd left. He faced them head on, his voice steady. "This town's stronger when we lift each other up," he said at a town hall. "Love doesn't divide, use it rebuilds us." The room was quiet, then erupted in applause, led by Sarah and, to Eli's surprise, Tom. Willow Creek was changing, and Eli was its heart. Spring came to Willow Creek, and with it, the first signs of renewal. The new dam was under construction, its skeleton rising against the skyline, a symbol of the town's resilience. Eli stood on the hill where they'd watched the flood, now a vantage point for hope. The community center was taking shape, its walls painted with murals of unity, designed by local kids. Eli's vision was becoming reality, but his time here was nearing its end. He'd stayed longer than planned, drawn by the town's need and his own unresolved heart. Jamie had visited, his presence a reminder of the life waiting in San Francisco. They walked the rebuilding streets together, Jamie's hand in Eli's, unapologetic and free. Some townsfolk stared, but others smiled misses. Larson even waved, her pie-baking hands now a gesture of welcome. Eli felt the town shift. Not fully healed, but trying. Tom and Ruth were part of that change. They'd started attending community meetings. Tom's voice quieter but supportive. Ruth's warmth bridging gaps. One evening, Tom asked Eli to the old family barn. Half destroyed by the flood, but still standing. I kept this, Tom said, pulling a photo from his wallet. Eli at 10. Grinning with a fishing pole. Never stopped loving you. Even when I was wrong. Eli's throat tightened. He didn't forgive fully. Not yet. But he took the photo. A piece of his past reclaimed. The town threw a festival to mark the dam's progress. A celebration of survival. Eli stood on a makeshift stage. Sarah at his side. And spoke to the crowd. We lost a lot, he said, his voice carrying over the music and laughter. But we gained something to each other. This town's not just buildings. It's us. The applause was thunderous. And Eli saw Tom in the crowd, clapping, his eyes wet with pride. When Eli left Willow Creek, it wasn't an escape like before. He drove away with Jamie, the photo in his pocket, his mother's hug still warm, his father's handshake a promise of more talks to come. The town had saved itself, but Eli had saved its soul, proving love could rebuild what hate had torn apart. Back in San Francisco, he carried Willow Creek with him, not the pain, but the hope, the strength. The proof that even the deepest wounds could heal when people chose to change.